Hereditary cancer is a cancer risk you inherit from your parents or grandparents. But it's more than just your direct family. In fact, hereditary cancer is a genetic link you may have to your ancestors and other distant relatives or people who are part of your family tree that you may or may not know, or may not even know about, but they are a part of the network of your genetic makeup. And if they had a rare cancer, you very well may get it too, says Dr. Brian Schertz. He's of the University of Washington Department of Laboratory Medicine. And it is home to a new website called connectmyvariant.org. The project is designed to help people and their families understand the medical uncertainties that rare genetic variants may play in their well-being. Dr. Schertz heads up the team at connectmyvariant.org, and he goes on to say, we educate, provide resources, we help families connect within their extended family tree, and we provide resources to help out people or help put people in touch with clinical facilities and studies. Dr. Schertz says, we know of more than 200,000 people in the U.S. who have benefited from early knowledge about potential rare cancers by looking at hereditary links. But we also estimate there are another 2.5 million people in the U.S. who could prevent cancer or reduce the impact of cancer just by knowing a family member developed that rare cancer. And this, of course, is a situation that exists in Canada, and Dr. Schertz is working with and available to Canadians as well. And I invited Dr. Brian Schertz to join me for a conversation that matters about the power knowledge brings to developing precise medical strategies to prevent and treat rare cancers early. Dr. Schertz, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks for having me.
You know, on the surface, you can't help but sort of go, oh yeah, of course that makes sense, because I know that when it comes to, let's say, breast cancer, for instance, medical professionals are always looking at women saying, is there somebody else in your family who has suffered from breast cancer? Therefore, we know that you have a potential risk. But how important is it, especially with rare forms of cancer, that we catch it as early as possible?
Yeah, well, studies have shown again and again that if you catch cancer early, then you're better able to treat it. But what we're trying to do is do kind of one step beyond that, and we're trying to do primary prevention. So if you can find somebody who has a hereditary cancer risk, then if they have a risk of, let's say, breast and ovarian cancer, then they can get screenings if they want to get screenings, or if they choose, they can get surgeries to prevent that type of cancer. Once if someone has a pathogenic variant in BRCA1 or BRCA2 or PALB2, they can get that type of prevention. Or if somebody has a syndrome called Lynch syndrome, which causes increased colon cancer or endometrial cancer risk, they can get colonoscopies every year for that early detection. But after they're done having kids, they can have a hysterectomy, which completely prevents the risk of endometrial cancer. So we want early detection, yes, but in this case, in these families where there's over 50% risk of cancer in people who have those genetic variants, we can go one step further and prevent cancer before it even starts.
How important is it that the sequencing of the human genome and of each of these individuals helps them understand whether or not there is this interplay within their particular expression of the human genome and its relationship to somebody who may be way down their family tree? Like, do you have to look for all those A, C, Gs, and Ts to see how they're lining up and what the potential connections are?
Yeah, that's a great question. So usually when we're looking at hereditary cancer risk, we're looking at individuals who have one specific mutation that is causing that risk. And there's lots of people who are doing research on like situations where there's multiple variants that may be involved in creating risk scores for that. But that's really cutting edge research that's probably not going to be relevant for everyday ordinary medical care for another 5 or 10 years. Mm-hmm. We've known about families where there's this hereditary cancer risk for over 2 decades. And we've known that if you find somebody in that family who has hereditary cancer, then they can talk to their siblings and their parents and their aunts and uncles and let them know about that one specific one that has hereditary cancer, that one specific mutation that causes cancer risk in that family. And what we're doing is really taking the tools that we have for genealogy and taking the tools that we have for genetics as it relates to genealogy to be able to find those additional relatives. So we're looking for one specific variant, but then you get tools like Ancestry DNA or 23andMe DNA or MyHeritage DNA. There's about a dozen of these, and they all do the same thing. They sequence the genome so they can find who's related to who else. And so we're leveraging that to be able to help prevent hereditary cancer. So that's the unique story that we're doing is being able to help people find those distant relatives and talk to those distant relatives so they can prevent cancer.
As you're speaking, I think of a couple of people that I have known in my life and unfortunately lost to pancreatic cancer. And having spoken to them, they said, it came as a complete surprise because nobody in my family had it. And yet I don't think of pancreatic cancer as being rare, but I haven't met somebody who had pancreatic cancer, and unfortunately it's very difficult to defeat unless you catch it early. And so when it comes to pancreatic cancer, is this something that could be remarkably beneficial because we know that it takes so long to be able to identify whether or not that cancer is starting to grow within inside that person's body?
Yeah, absolutely. So pancreatic cancer is one that's really difficult to detect early, just like ovarian cancer. There's not a really good screening way for it. And about 10% of 5 or 10% of pancreatic cancer is familial, and it's that small piece that we want to be able to prevent. Unfortunately, for the other 90% of pancreatic cancer, it does come as a surprise, and it's really difficult to know who's going to get it and who's not going to get it. So we're focused on that 5 or 10% where we can say, we know this person's at risk, and the screening makes sense in this person because we know that their risk is so much higher than the general population's risk that the type of invasive screening that you would do for pancreatic cancer. These are the people where it makes sense. These are the people where it makes sense to do that early detection.
So what if I'm worried about this and I suspect that there might have been somebody within my family that had pancreatic cancer, yet I don't know them, because this is really what we're talking about, you being able to connect people with one another when they have a genetic or ancestral connection. Let's say I have a concern about this, I go to MyVariant, I connect MyVariant.org and find, oh my gosh, here it turns out there is somebody within my family that has had pancreatic cancer. What does that allow you to do to start to design a strategy that will hopefully prevent me from getting that very deadly cancer?
Yes, so this is how it typically works. Typically you see one person who has a mutation or a pathogenic variant they know about. And if they sign up for Connect My Variant, we will start to help them find other people who have that same pathogenic variant. And so one example is someone named Carol, and she has a specific mutation. You have to understand that in each of these genes, there are thousands of different variants. And so in BRCA1, which is one that we hear about most, there's over 4,000 different pathogenic variants that we know about. And each of those represents a different family. And some of them represent a mutation that happened 700 or 800 years ago, and there's hundreds of thousands of people across the globe that have that. And some of them might have happened, let's say, 200 years ago. And so it might only be a few dozen people that have that one. And when we find somebody who has that, then we help them find other people who have the same one. Because almost always, about 90% of the time, those two variants connect with a common ancestor. And so if someone signs up and says, I have a specific variant, then we'll be able to say, is there anybody else in our database that has that? And if not, then if they do, then we're able to do some exciting things. Then we're able to connect them up. We're able to help them do genealogy. We have an association with the Brigham Young University Center for Family History and Genealogy that provides professional genealogists to help with that. So then they start tracing their family trees back until they find a common ancestor. And then they start looking for the descendants of that common ancestor, and those ones first who are most likely to have that pathogenic variant or most likely to get cancer because of that genetic change. And so those people start contacting their relatives. So hopefully for you, if you are somebody who didn't know if you had that or not, then the way it could potentially benefit you is one of those people says, hey, we found you, you're our third cousin, and we know your ancestor is, let's say, Adela Cowley, this one of my great great grandparents, let's say, and we know this person had that variant, or we think this person had that variant, and so we think that all of the descendants of Adela should get tested, especially those who have parents who had cancer, but even those who didn't have parents who had cancer, because we know that sometimes this skips generations, and especially pancreatic cancer, because it's so rare, can skip generations. And so the people in the family would know that they were supposed to get tested, not because their parent had cancer, but because their parent was related to somebody who had that variant. Sometimes people sign up and there's no one else that has the same variant. It's one of those ones that's one of those, let's say 4,000 in BRCA1 or over 3,000 in BRCA2 or several thousand in PALB2 or there's about 20 genes that each have about multiple, many variants. So if we don't know anybody else with them, then we send them to Facebook, we send them to the Facing Our Cancer Risk Empowered message boards, and we help them to be able to do the social networking, to be able to see, hey, does anybody else out there have this? And we have connections with lots of different sites in the United States and in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, and in a growing number of places around the world where there's these social groups where they're connecting up and asking each other, hey, what are you doing to prevent cancer? I have this mutation. Does anybody else have the same one? Can we connect? Can we find out how we're related? And can we help other people prevent cancer?
Okay, so if the variant shows up or you suspect that you've got this variant and you're trying to find out this connection, or let's say you suspect that you may be at risk for some reason and you discover that there is a member of your distant family that did have this rare cancer, it's not a certainty that you're going to get that cancer, is it? Because cancer is not only just having the variant, but is it not a combination of lifestyle, environment that you live in, the quality of the food and water that you drink, and so all of these things have to come into play. So I can suspect that somebody might go, oh my gosh, my great uncle 16 times removed had this. I'm going to die from it. We have to be careful not to have people go to that extent.
Absolutely, and it's actually, people get scared about it at first. People get scared about, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And a lot of people actually don't get genetic testing because they're scared about the uncertainty. And what we try to tell them is really the genetic testing is going to help you line up all those other things. Everyone should be, eating healthy. Everyone should be exercising. No one should be smoking. We know those are things that can change your cancer risk. But what this allows somebody to say is that, in addition to all those other things, there's this thing here that could dramatically change how someone manages their risk, how someone thinks about their lifestyle, and what other things they could play in. And something that people don't realize is if there is this familial cancer, if there's this hereditary cancer risk, then less than half the people end up testing positive. If you have a first-degree relative, or let's say a parent or a sibling or a child who has it, then you have a 50% chance of having it. But then a lot of the people getting tested are not first-degree relatives; they're secondary relatives. They're aunts, uncles, cousins. Have even less risk, and so aunts and uncles would have 25% chance. Cousins would have a 12.5% chance. And so most of the people getting tested test negative. And for the people who test negative, that's actually really, really beneficial, because instead of saying, well, first of all, it's a sigh of relief. It's a sigh of relief that, oh yeah, grandma got breast cancer when she was 40 and died of breast cancer, and I'm not at the same risk that the grandma was of having that. And then the other thing is that allows you to say, the screening that I'm going to get is going to be tailored to me, knowing that I don't have that variant. So you had Paula Gordon on your show a few weeks ago,
Right.
and she commented it's difficult for people under 40 to get tested, to get mammograms. Um, and that if somebody has a relative that had breast cancer, let's say at 45, the recommendation would be to start getting mammograms at age 35. Well, if that person got breast cancer at 45 because they had a pathogenic variant in BRCA2, then the relatives who test positive now need to start getting screening, let's say at 35, or maybe even earlier, start getting mammograms. But the people who test negative now can get general population screening. They don't have to start getting mammograms at 35. And so there really is benefit to knowing whether you're positive or whether you're negative.
Well, in the case of breast cancer, having talked to Dr. Gordon, it becomes clear the earlier you can identify whether or not you're going to develop breast cancer, the earlier you can prevent that from happening or treat it so that it does not become so life-altering or life-threatening. And I guess armed with that information now, it's much easier to go to your primary caregiver, physician, and say, okay, I'm only 30, but I now am armed with information that says you need to put me through the system to get the test. And that kind of knowledge is real power.
That is. Actually, the reason why I'm talking to you today is because a young lady from British Columbia, Ashley, has a pathogenic variant in a gene called PALB2, and her one's called exon 9 through 10 deletion. It's a very rare one. She thinks it came from her grandmother, who is from Slovakia, and so she's traced it back there, and she's been looking all over to find other people who have this variant, and she hasn't been able to find anybody who has it. She's looked at the scientific literature and said, "Oh, in the supplemental paper 2, here's somebody who has the variant. Can I contact the researchers and find it?" And she's contacted laboratories. So we're doing whatever we can to help her find other people. And the reason why she's so passionate about it is because she had breast cancer. She first developed breast cancer when she was 28. And she had no idea why she was getting breast cancer that early. And she took care of it. Went through the surgery and all the procedures and the medications she needed to prevent it from coming back. But it came back when it came back after 5 years, and now it's 10 years on. She's 38 now. She has metastatic breast cancer, and it's stage 4 now. Kind of her wish with the last few years of her life is to be able to find other people who have this and who have that same variant, so she can help them prevent cancer. She thinks it came from her dad. Of course, her dad didn't get breast cancer. It's unusual for men to get breast cancer. Not impossible. I think that the most famous person who's had breast cancer is Matthew Knowles. He had a mutation in a gene called BRCA2, and he's Beyonce's father. But he came out in public and said that he has this, and he calls it chest cancer rather than breast cancer, because men know they have chests and don't know they have a small amount of breast tissue as well. But anyways, she got it from her dad. Her dad's fine, and probably from her grandmother. And now she's looking for other people who have that same variant. And that the people who are involved in this are absolutely amazing. It really is a community of people who are trying to help other people prevent cancer. And some of the people who are involved in this are just doing extraordinary things to be able to find the other people who they don't want to have the same experience that they had.
Okay, so the number one objective of what you're doing is to try and help people get insight into what their own potential health could look like, and then put them in touch with the resources that will help them address concerns and get tested and so on. And if those things start to play themselves out, then do you continue to play a role, or do you allow them to work with their local healthcare practitioners?
Yeah, our goal is to get people to their local healthcare practitioners as quickly as we can. I work for the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at the University of Washington, and we do hereditary cancer risk testing. We do a very small amount. There's a few cases that the doctors in Canada send us. It's usually the ones they can't figure out they're sending us. But most of that happens at local laboratories with local doctors. The Hereditary Cancer program at BC Cancer is a place that if someone were in British Columbia, found out they had a mutation, we tell them to go there to get their care. So we encourage people to talk to each other, and there's really two benefits that we see when people start communicating with each other about their hereditary cancer risk. One of them is they can hopefully find connections. But the other one that happens is they start talking to each other about their treatments. And they say, oh, which doctor did you go to? What age were you at when you got ovarian cancer, or when you had this surgery? And those communications are really useful. When you find somebody who has the exact same thing that you have, and whose family history lines up with yours, then it gets very, very personal. And this is very personalized medicine. And so those conversations, we encourage them to have that happen, but we don't do the care here. We're working with people across the world, and so we want people to go to their own local doctors, their own genetic counselors, to find out what the genetic testing is going to be best for them is going to be based on their insurance and what testing is available, what the cost is, and kind of. So we want people to figure out what their local services are.
So what you are. Sorry, I cut you off there. What you are is a new kind of social network. But it's the kind of social network that says, I'm here to learn, and I'm also here to offer insights and help to others who may be on the same journey that I'm on. So how does it work? Somebody goes online, they sign up. What do they do?
Yeah, so someone goes on to connectmyvariant.org. They click the sign up button. And then there's a little short form that asks kind of what your name is, what your variant is, if there's a familial variant in your family, if you're interested in sharing your contact information with other people who have the same variant. And if you want to share your email, your phone number, or if you want to have a social media site like a Facebook page that has your variant, you can share that as well.
Okay, last question here, because you said something, you go in and you talk about what your variant is. How do I find out what potential variant I have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the thing to do is to talk to your doctor or find a genetic counselor and talk to them and see if you would qualify for testing under current guidelines, if you have a family history that's strong enough for it. This is something that really is only relevant to about 1% of the population.
Thank you very much. I think that this is quite enlightening, and it's a great service, really. I called it a social network, but it also serves as a service that people who are concerned about their well-being and relationship to rare variants of cancer can benefit from. Thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you very much.